the art of building is the art of defying gravity. Okay, we have got probably maybe 100 tons of stuff hanging above our heads at the moment. Are any of you scared by that? Probably not until I mention it to you. But this is the thing, you walk into a building every day and there is stuff floating in midair. It should be falling. Even the fact that you will walk upstairs and you will now defy gravity. Okay, you are leaving the ground behind you. It's a phenomenal thing. Early this year when we were building this chapel, I built my first archway. Archways just blow my mind. They're phenomenal things. I can show you the pictures later. The whole thing with an archway, if you ever get to a building where there's an archway, just stop and look at it. The rocks are perpetually falling, but always being stopped from falling at the same time. That's the beauty of it. Like, they're actually in the process of falling, but they've been stopped because of the keystone. And I found myself just literally standing there having a prayer time, just staring at this archway. Because I think that's the image of the gospel. The whole reason why we call Jesus the keystone is because we are naturally falling. And he stops us, he holds us. So we are actually now able to hang suspended in midair. That's the Christian life. You know, we're not doing this naturally. It's only because the keystone is holding us in place that we're able to be suspended above everything else that's natural. Okay. Now, so in terms of what actually are we doing in evangelization, we are trying to beat gravity in two things. So personal gravity, there is that effect of sin within the human heart, which is always trying to pull you down. Okay, and that's what we call concupiscence. Okay, it's this gravitational pull, always trying to pull me down to what is base and sinful and ugly. The gospel is always trying to help us to defy that and go beyond it. Okay, so in all of our ministry, we need to have that as our clear goal. We are trying to help people go beyond what is natural. Okay. Now there is a bigger gravity which you need to be aware of, and that is the gravitational pull within the church. Okay, so in terms of doing any mission, you've got to understand both of these. How that gravitational pull, sin, works in a human person, but you guys need to be experts at sin. In the same way a doctor needs to be an expert of sickness, okay? He doesn't become an expert by becoming sick. He reads books. Okay? You need to become experts at sin, not by sinning, but by reading books. Okay? Start with Augustine's Confessions, and you're going to get a good insight into how it works.
What about watching movies?
Depends on which movies you're watching. Okay? Other movies may lead you into sin. So, good clarification. There's a gravitational pull that occurs within the church. Now, this is just my theory, take it or leave it. Pope Paul VI talks about the 4 stages of evangelization. Some people throw in 5, some people say 6, some people just like lists. Anyway. Keep it simple. You've got initial proclamation, you then go to conversion, you then enter into the community of the church. Okay? In the church, you then come into discipleship, you're evangelizing the faith, and then, he says, you enter into the point where you're equipped to go back out on mission. And so his most powerful line, he says, the touchstone of evangelization is when the evangelized goes out to evangelize. And he's basically saying you're not actually converted until you're going back out on mission. Okay? Now, we always talk about the church being a bubble. Bubbles can be good or they can be bad. Okay, everyone needs bubbles. But the whole thing is that the world is a very stressful, ugly place a lot of the time. And so your house becomes a sanctuary, your house becomes a bubble. As soon as I close the door, you can relax. Okay, I'm in my sanctuary. And you actually need that for your sanity. If you were to live in constant chaos, you'd go insane. However, sometimes bubbles can become bad. And sometimes for the sake of protecting my sanctuary, I can end up locking the rest of the world out. Okay, so go for a drive through the wealthy suburbs of the city, and you're going to see that the size of the fences and the gates gets higher and higher based on how much wealth they have. You know, the more money a person has, the bigger their fence is. And it's an interesting example because, you know, I don't want to pick on rich people here, but it just creates a nice little illustration. There's a couple of different reasons why you would create a really hard bubble that no one can penetrate. Firstly, because I'm scared. I'm scared of losing what I have. I don't want you to come and steal my wealth. But also, I don't want someone to challenge my bubble. You know, I like living in this world where I believe that I deserve to be rich. The last thing I want is a poor person sitting at my gate. So I'm going to go and live with other rich people who all drive Bentleys and Ferraris, and they all have European holidays every second week. You know, and it just confirms that this is okay. We're allowed to be wealthy. So you've got a physical bubble, but you've also then got a psychological bubble. You know, where we hang around people who all think the same way as us. The last thing you want is for a beggar to walk down the street and start pitching his tent on your front lawn. Because it's going to remind you that actually maybe I should be using my money for something else. You know, it starts to pierce the bubble. It starts to break through. Okay? Now, use this as an analogy for the church. The church is meant to be a good bubble. Okay, it's meant to be a sanctuary of peace and healing, where people can come out of the cold and enter into this nice little warm room and actually become human again. But if you imagine, it's meant to be like the walls of the bubble are meant to be thin or porous, so that you can enter in easily and you can leave easily. So really this idea that Pope Paul VI is talking about, he's saying the community is meant to be a bubble, but the walls of that bubble are meant to be thin. So people can enter into this very easily, and once they've been nourished and converted and discipled, they can then leave easily and go back out into the world. And go back to the beginning. So the whole idea is that the mission is meant to go back to initial proclamation. And the key word there being initial, okay? Go back and evangelize people who have never heard the gospel. And then the process continues. Now, the problem is, church looks more like this. Okay, initial proclamation goes into conversion, which then enters into the community, but the walls of the bubble are much thicker. You then have church renewal programs, which then leads to conversion, discipleship. We then train a whole pile of people on mission, but those people then go back to the church and evangelize people who are already Catholics. So, you guys will be training young people to go out on mission. You know, you're giving talks on evangelization, talks on mission, but then you're sending them to go and run a youth group as their mission. They're actually going back to the church. Or even when we have something like APSI, you know, you might have a group who are going to be sent out on mission internationally. There's a good chance they're just going to go to a Catholic church in Fiji and run a mission there. Okay, like, very rarely are we actually evangelizing people who are outside the bubble. Now, both of these images are actually important. I don't want to dismiss either one of them. Because when the church talks about the new evangelization, the definition of the new evangelization has changed and adapted over time. But originally the idea was that the new evangelization was to evangelize lapsed Catholics, or Catholics who needed to rediscover their faith. And it was very much this model. Over time, the church has broadened that to actually say, you know, we still need to go out and evangelize everyone else as well. This is purely my theory. I think there's a danger in this model which is that the walls of the bubble eventually become thicker and thicker. And for a couple of reasons. Because we are only Catholics evangelizing Catholics. Okay, or people who have come from a Catholic worldview. So we're evangelizing young kids in a Catholic high school. Sure, they've never gone to church, but they've lived and breathed that understanding. Okay, like there's already a framework we can build on. It becomes the easiest form of evangelization because there's already a framework we can build upon. They've already heard who Jesus is. They've already heard a basic idea of the gospel message. We've just got to correct it a bit. Because what they heard wasn't quite correct, so let's just correct it and tell them that God loves them. That's actually a whole lot easier than going to evangelize someone who's never even heard of God. Who's only ever heard of Jesus Christ as a swear word. And they're like, huh? You mean it's actually a person? That's going to take a whole lot more effort and thinking and prayer and questioning. And it's probably not going to achieve the same sort of results. So it's not going to feed our ego quite as much as when we can say, hey, we've got 400 people for that event. As opposed to saying, we got one guy who left halfway through the talk because he couldn't understand it. Now, go back to that image I was saying about the rich person protecting his bubble. He's afraid of having stuff stolen and is afraid of being challenged that maybe he's wrong. The danger with this is that there's something of the same thing. If you look at the church today, there's a really defensive mentality that we're afraid of losing the faith. And we've got to put the walls up higher and higher and guard ourselves against any evil influence. Because we're actually afraid of losing the faith. I hear this a lot from some youth groups, where, without going into personal details, but had a few situations where I've heard youth leaders say, we exist to evangelize, we want to save the world, we want to try and draw everyone to know Christ. And I've said to them, so how about we go evangelize those people over there? Ooh, they're a bad influence. We wouldn't want them influencing our kids. Their parents would get angry because, those kids probably do drugs. And so we're saying one thing, but we're actually doing another. And this is a classic problem in the church. We talk big, but we act really small. We talk about saving everybody, but actually we're only really wanting to saving our people. Because there's almost this belief that the message of the world is more powerful than the message of the gospel. Like somehow we believe that those kids are going to influence our kids more than our kids are going to influence them. It's more likely that if they come to our youth group, our kids are going to start taking drugs rather than they're going to start getting holy. There's a massive problem in that. And once again, it's one of these questions we never ask. If that's the case, then the whole youth group is rubbish. And you've got to realise that, and you've got to say that to people. Like if we're only evangelising these kids to the point where they need to hang around each other, we're not actually evangelising them. Like if their faith is that fragile, we are failing. We're going to get onto that later on anyway, when we talk about foundations. So we're afraid of losing something. Look at all the blog sites on the internet about, trying to defend who's the most Catholic person or whatever. We're just building the walls higher and higher. But there's a psychological bubble here as well, where we're afraid of actually being challenged by what might come through the door. In the same way, the rich person doesn't want a beggar at his gate because it suddenly challenges his whole worldview of economics and social justice and everything. If you've got an atheist walk into the church, or someone from whatever background, it somehow challenges that psychological bubble that we're okay and you're not. Or we're the good people and you're the bad people. We know what the truth is and you don't. Because you might find this atheist actually understands God better than you do. Or maybe he's actually a more loving, charitable person than we are. and it becomes a little bit confronting. So once again, there's a psychological realm to this as well, where we actually don't want to go outside and see what the rest of the world's doing. I would suggest, because we're talking here about defying gravity. In your ministries, you need to be really intentional about trying to go beyond the gravitational pull. If you can almost think of this as like the default settings on a computer. You know how computers come with the settings that most people are going to want. And if you ever try and change the settings, it's a recipe for a headache. Okay, because you spend 3 hours trying to change the settings of the fonts and everything, and then you turn your back and it's gone back to the default again. Like, I don't want that. The same dynamic happens in any ministry. Okay, there's basic default settings. You could start with this idea of let's do basic evangelization. There's a gravitational pull which is going to pull it back to discipleship. You could start off by saying, let's go and evangelize the lost and the broken and the outcast. There's a gravitational pull that's going to bring you back to evangelizing the middle class, the comfortable, the ordinary. Okay, and I reckon this is probably different in different cultures, but it's good to stop and think, what are actually the default settings in any ministry? Years ago when I was in the parish, we did a review, and we basically put up these 4 headings: initial proclamation, conversion, discipleship, equipping for mission. We said, okay, let's list off everything we're doing and put it under the right heading. And we had maybe one thing under initial proclamation. So we got a lot of groups at that parish. We had one thing under initial proclamation. We had maybe 3 things under conversion. We had 20 things under discipleship. And we had one thing under equipping for mission. And it was this revelation moment because we sat back and thought, oh, we're wasting our time. We're not actually doing what we're meant to be doing. Because everything was focused on discipleship to church, okay? Care for the people who are already Catholic. Even though we're saying our mission was to go out and reach the lost and the broken and the needy, the easiest thing is to care for those who are already here. So if you recognise, okay, there's this gravitational pull inwards to just care for your own, you need to set a really clear vision and say, we're going to break through the walls of this bubble. Okay? It's not going to happen by itself. I think this is the key thing you need to realise. You can't fly just by thinking good thoughts. Anyone can do that? Anyone? No? Can we? It sounds a bit stupid, but it's a good way of thinking about this. Like, I can dream about flying like a bird, but it's not going to happen. The only way that can happen is if I actually have a clear strategy and a bit of engineering behind me, and I can build a plane. For centuries, humanity sat there looking at birds thinking, gee, that'd be nice. But it was just a thought. You could just have this thought of evangelizing all those non-believers in this suburb, but it needs to go beyond a thought. Okay, this is where we need to get strategy.